And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again, and I'm continuing to watch the MCU one movie at a time, one day at a time. And I have just finished watching Avengers, or technically Avengers Assemble. The first Avengers movie, basically. End of phase one. I just saw that, I've just watched the DVD, here are my thoughts. To start off with, there's a lot more Thanos and a lot more context for the wider Thanos related things than I ever remember there being in here. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's not much. If you put it all together, you'd have maybe 90 seconds of footage of this, but it's still a lot more than I remembered. So the actual opener, it opens up in space with one of Thanos' lackeys, who, by the way, we never see again. It's not Corvus Glaive, it's not any of the cool guys from Endgame, it's just some random dude. And with one of his lackeys talking. And that opener is in space, and straight away it gives you this weird kind of cosmic scope. Um, Pretty cool. Never remembered that. One thing I will say about that, I don't get why Thanos gave Loki the spear, because the spear has the soul gem in, right? I mean, I think it does. So why would he give someone an infinity? Do you know what? I'm not going to pull threads. It does not matter. Um, Anyway, so not only is there that at the beginning, and obviously there's the post-credit scene as well, which hints to Thanos as well. But Loki also had these like weird visions at one point in the middle of the movie, where again he's up in this kind of cosmic space place, and he's trying to look at Thanos and so on. And then later on, Thor actually alludes to that as well. You talk to Loki, and he's like, "Who's pulling your strings? Who showed you this? Who told you to do this?" And they never come back to it. So it's interesting, one, that they had quite a lot of that, and two, that I never really noticed it in the sense that it was quite unobtrusive and it just felt like comic book scope, if you know what I mean. So super cool going back and watching this now through the lens of having seen the entire MCU. Um, what else about the movie? Well, the soundtrack. This is the first time you hear the Avengers theme tune by Alan Silvestri, and oh man, it's so good. It's not as deep or as nuanced or as resonant as it becomes eventually in Age of Ultron, Infinity War, and Endgame, but dude, it is just so good to hear it. The opening is a solid opener. Basically, the Tesseract goes a bit crazy, destroys the shield installation, Loki arrives. It's cool to see the Tesseract, especially now having seen Captain Marvel and Infinity War and getting a much better grasp of what it is and what it does. So it's just kind of cool again to watch that with that wider context. Um, Next is the Black Widow interrogation scene, which I do remember. I'm only human, so I do remember that very well. And Scarlett Jo kills it. One thing I will say, which again is brilliant to look at in retrospect, is the sentence that gets her to suddenly be like, "Okay, I'm gonna stop this particular mission and I'm gonna move on to this other mission," is when Coulson says to her, he's not that we need you. It's not that you have to stop. It's not that something's come up." She ignores all that. He goes, "Barton's been compromised," as in Hawkeye's been compromised, and it's at that point that Black Widow's like, "Right, I'm dropping this. This is a priority now." And it's really interesting. I mean, it's great because again, it foreshadows towards their relationship, and it foreshadows something that's consistent throughout the rest of the franchise. But again, blink and you miss it first time around. Then obviously you've got Tony Stark, you've got Iron Man. His new way of getting out of the Iron Man suit is like super cool, and they know that because they dwell on that quite a bit. It looks awesome. Um, they start getting the team together basically. They introduced the helicarrier, which is again super awesome. Um, it's it's one of those things in the comics. The helicarrier was actually designed by Hank Pym, the guy who ends up being Ant Man. But given how they use Ant Man the MCU in the end, I totally get why they didn't go with that. But anyway, the helicarrier looks awesome. If you'd told me before this film came out that you will ever see the helicarrier on screen in a cinema and it wouldn't look stupid, it could actually look plausible, I wouldn't have believed you. But they do it so well. Anyway, then you get to the first big action beat after the intro, and the intro action beats I never really count. So the first big action beat is Loki in Germany, just kicking ass. Did I forget this first time round, or does he tear somebody's eye out with a set of blades in the middle of a crowded room? Like, I don't remember that. That was hardcore. Um, yeah. So that's an interesting scene. It's resolved well. Action's good. Dialogue is good. It then sort of goes into what felt like kind of an obligatory three-way fight between Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor, which was it was cooler now than originally. I remember originally thinking, oh, come on, this is just the mandatory get the heroes to have a misunderstanding and beat each other up comic book nonsense. But actually, it's much cooler now watching it after Endgame, because these are the three, these are the holy trinity of the Avengers Assemble group, and it works out really well, actually. Especially with Cap being the sort of the calming influence that stops Iron Man and Thor from beating each other up. Then it moves smoothly into the second action beat, which is Black Widow's interrogation of Loki, and then everything kicking off on the helicarrier. I've got to say, it is a cool, really well written scene. You can tell this is Joss Whedon. The one thing Joss Whedon is good at doing is putting disparate characters together and making it work, not making them gel. And he doesn't make them gel. You put this many alpha personalities in a room, they are going to have massive friction with one another, and he does that really, really, really well. However, despite that friction, you can see this team coming together, and it's just awesome. There's good dialogue, there's good characterization. Despite it has no action, it has a lot of tension and a lot of build up, and then you get to the action scene. What can I say? The second action beat, the helicarrier is getting torn apart by the Hulk, Iron Man's repairing and stuff. I know there's a lot of jokes that go on online about this entire action scene is basically Iron Man repairing an engine. And I kind of get that, but it allows the other characters to breathe. And in particular, the fight that happens between Black Widow and Hawkeye, where eventually Black Widow knocks out Hawkeye and sort of brings him back to the good side, that's incredible. Like, that is so good. I know I said this before when I think I watched Iron Man 2, which is that I could just watch Black Widow fighting all day long. But like, really, this was a really well put together fight scene. It was actually kind of the highlight of the whole second action beat. And then it ends with, spoiler warning, obviously, Phil Coulson dying. But again, the illusion that they have there, and by that I mean allusion that I have there, is that they allude to the idea that Coulson dies in order to inspire the Avengers. It gives them something to fight for. And he even says that himself. He goes, this wouldn't work unless they had something to... And then he dies before he says it. But again, Joss Whedon's really good at that, about leaving these sort of empty, pregnant moments where you kind of fill in the words yourself. So yeah, that was just... The whole thing was just great. Really solid, really good. And that smoothly segues into our third action beat, which is the Battle of New York. And honestly, an alien invasion of New York and superheroes fighting, and to somehow make it look good and realistic. Yeah, they do. I've never seen anything look like this before I saw this film. And I remember even at the time when it came out the cinema, I was like, damn, that looked really, really good. Ironically, in terms of costume design and stuff, when you look at Cap's costume in this, it looks obviously far less hokey than it did in the movie I watched yesterday, Captain America the First Avenger, but at the same time it's still quite bright blue. The boots still look quite sort of bright and red and so on. It's going to be really interesting over the next couple of weeks watching this uniform evolve into the much more militaristic uniform that we have by the end of the franchise. Anyway, sorry, we'll talk about that more in a second, but the battle is awesome. The Hulk is amazing. There's the scenes we recognise and that we know. The Hulk punch where he knocks out that entire Qatari battleship. The puny god thing where he beats the hell out of Loki. It's just awesome. I mean, the whole battle is great. The pacing is great. The characterization is great. Watching it this time round, I was trying to work out why it was so good. And I think the reason that it works, the reason that the Battle of New York works in a cinematic way with these disparate characters like running around and jumping all over the place, and you've got 6-7 different action points at any given time and people doing things in different locations. The reason it works is that the direction of this movie just pans the camera from one to the other seamlessly. Like, there are so many scenes where you're following Iron Man into a crowd, and then the Hulk cuts across him and you're following the Hulk, and then the camera drops down and you've got Black Widow doing something, and that pivots to Hawkeye shooting something, and you follow the arrow through, and then Thor lands, and you're literally moving across, not just like from one end of a building to another, but from one end of the city to another in long continuous panning motions. And it really gives you a sense of immediacy and of scale, yet also of intimacy of the fight, because you're constantly focused not actually on the battle, not actually even on the city, but actually on the individuals fighting within the city. In that sense, it's more similar than I'd ever noticed before to the way Aaron Sorkin filmed The West Wing. So if you look at The West Wing, there's the classic, walk and talk while they're moving throughout the various offices and so on. But there are some scenes in the Western where literally it segues from one conversation to the next conversation that cuts across it, and then it starts following people walking a different direction, and then someone cuts across them and it starts following someone through a different room, and then it spirals back to the beginning. And it gives you a constant scope of this constant action happening within quite a large geographic area, but with all these moving parts smoothly interlocking. That's what the final Battle of New York was, and that's why it works. And I think it's really interesting to keep that in mind. I mean, I might be wrong. Well, what do I know about filmmaking? Nothing. But from my point of view, when you look at that, and then you look at a movie like, for example, Justice League, and you see that it doesn't do that. The very few moments where Justice League works is when it does do that. And those are the moments, I imagine, put together by Joss Whedon anyway. But that's how you do a huge battle with massive scale and huge consequences and huge action scenes that are predominantly focused around 4 or 5 human scale individuals. And I mean human scale individuals, normal people, sort of jumping from one thing to another or shooting arrows or whatever it might be. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the final battle. Thought it was awesome. The movie ended brilliantly. Fantastic. The post-credit, well, the mid-credit scene teases at Thanos, and I'll be honest, I was skeptical as hell when this happened. I remember coming out of the cinema and turning to the person next to me and being like, I hate the Infinity Gauntlet. I hate Thanos. The Infinity Gauntlet comics sucked. This is going to be terrible. And you know what? I was wrong. I admit that. And then the post-credit scene is just a pure comedy post-credit scene, but well worth watching. Overall, what can I say, guys? This was just an awesome movie. Like I say, I don't score my movies, but this film was great. It's the end of phase 1. It totally pays off the build-up for the first 5 movies. It's brilliant. I remember at the time thinking it was incredible. It's amazing to think how far they'd come, and it's amazing to think how far they're going to go. I guess just my couple of final thoughts about it. Films, yeah, just is brilliant. It hints towards something called the World Council, who give Thor his orders and directives and so on throughout the movie. Sorry, not Thor, Nick Fury, his orders and directives throughout the movie. And I can't remember those at all, so I'm wondering whether or not they feature in later movies, or whether or not they get sort of MacGuffined out of the way by something or other. I don't know, so I will keep a close eye on that. Yeah, just brilliant. Oh, and one final thing. Coming back to Captain America's costume. In this, it's really bright blue, bright red, quite garish, but it's much less garish than his actual comic book costume. And obviously, over the course of the next movies with Winter Soldier, Civil War, and then the Endgame movies, it's going to get more and more realistic, more and more militarized, sort of darker, more scuffed, more like armor. And that works. And I mean, I might change my mind as I watch those movies in the next couple of weeks, but from what I remember really liking that direction of travel. And it's surprising now watching Avengers Assemble that you can see how kind of actually still remarkably cartoonish and brightly coloured and old-fashioned the costume is now. The reason I mention that is that it kind of reminds me of what happened with Superman. Like, with Snyder's Superman and Man of Steel, they started out of the gate with Kal-El having this kind of Kryptonian battle armor, which, by the way, I think looks awesome. I love the Zack Snyder Superman suit. But I do wonder whether or not it would have been better if it had started off with something more true to the comic book roots, something a bit brighter, a bit more bright yellow, bright red, bright blue, less like chainmail, less like armor. And then if throughout the movies, had the DC Extended Universe actually gone anywhere, it had then moved towards this Kryptonian battle armor. Like, maybe that would have been a better way to do it. I mean, that's what happened with Captain America, and it worked really, really well. Anyway, sorry to go on so long. Awesome movie. I am really enjoying this watch through. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, like, comment, subscribe. As always, support the channel by heading over to Amazon and picking up the novel, which would be 99 cents or free if you can. Always good to read something new and try something new during quarantine. How are you guys finding the quarantine? And are you watching along as I'm doing this? If so, please drop some comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'm more than happy if you disagree with me, or if you think that maybe there's different reasons why things like the Battle of New York worked. Yeah, please let me know, guys. And tomorrow I am going to be watching Iron Man 3. So until then, stay classy.